Hello, welcome to a new model build. This one is another out of the ordinary one. It's another pop culture themed model. This time we're doing a coach in the style of the AE86 from my favourite anime series, Initial D. The basis for this will be a Tri-ang Mk.1 coach. These are easy to come by and they're great for bashing into other coaches. For those of you who don't know, Initial D is an anime and manga series about Fujiwara Takame, who works for his dad's tofu shop in Japan. He's been delivering tofu for the shop for several years, even before he's got his driving license. Unbeknownst to him, his car is a highly tuned street racing vehicle, and he's actually become an amazing street racer without knowing it. He originally has no interest in street racing, but kind of gets dragged into it. It all begins with him running tofu deliveries up and down the local mountain. So I've just created this coach as a tribute. Anybody who's dreamed of being a racing driver should watch Initial D. It's fantastic. Full of mythology and slight nonsense and questionable physics, but it's good fun. I almost feel like I should apologise to the 90% of people out there who won't get the jokes in this, but I won't. So, thanks. Now, videos where people dismantle things are almost uniformly boring, so I'm going to use a little magic trick here. Abracadabra. There we go. I think for a build like this, it's important to have the right music. So here is some Eurobeat. Here's the roof and the main body frame. The interior, this is a compartment coach, but we'll be opening that one out later. The glazing is fixed to the sides by a bit of glue at the ends, but we'll get rid of that using a scalpel blade and a little bit of pressure. I'm not going to be reusing this, so that can go in the bin for recycling later. These coaches have a raised bead along the centre and top. This is a paint guide. And the cat decided he wanted to get up on the bench. Since this is a non-brake coach, there's plenty of windows, but we're going to be filling some of those in to create our kitchen area for cooking tofu. I'm going to be using styrene sheet for this, of which I'll cut a little strip out to fit here. Some poly cement will do. This one's really nice because it comes with a little applicator. Whilst you're waiting, why not subscribe to the channel, Railway Mania? I've heard it's very good, has lots of podcast episodes and model builds on it. And a bit of weight. More weight. I'm going to try using milliput. This has been in my drawer for a long time, so it's kind of gone off a little bit. Now, something I realised after I'd done this was that I should have peeled it, as in taken the thick outer layer off, because when I tried mixing them together, the outer layer stayed solid and wouldn't mix properly. So I've ended up with little globs of stuff I can't do anything with inside the mixture, and I should have started again really, but I didn't think about that at the time, and it'd been a long time since I've used milliput. It requires a lot of kneading to get it nice and warm and ready to use. And the glue's dried a little bit. Just going to put some supports behind because it's very easy to actually just push the plastic infill out. I'm going to use my finger to fill the majority of this space. Don't want to fill it up too high or make the milliput layer too thick because then it won't dry. Something else I should have done is remove the raised beading before I put the milliput in. Originally I was planning to use the beading as a paint guide, but the more I removed the milliput, the more I realised that I'd be removing the beading at the same time. You can see the little bits of the hardened skin of milliput stuck in the mixture there. These are the three main components of the Tri-ang coach that we're working on. I'm going to copy the window blanks on the other side of the coach, again using styrene strip. Trying to ensure a nice flat surface to stick to, removing all excess bits of flash. On the other side, I've learnt my lesson with the milliput, and there's far fewer bits of dried milliput stuck inside the mixture. The little metal weights are to stop me pushing my finger through the window blank and out the other side. With the windows filled on both sides, it's time to concentrate on some other areas. I don't want any of the old lettering to show through, so I'm just going to sand that off with a bit of wet and dry. Now that the milliput has dried, I'm going to use wet and dry, used wet, to sand it down to a smooth finish. The scalpel blade is to remove raised areas of plastic around the windows. After a certain amount of sanding, it'll look like you're getting a smooth surface. The best way to check is to apply a coat of primer, in this case filler primer, and to create a nice surface that you can then sand down smooth. Filler primer is often yellow. As you can see, I've sanded through this layer already a little bit, revealing the milliput underneath. Whilst that's drying, it's time to work on the interior a little bit. As you can see, this is a compartment coach. I'm going to use a new sharp blade and the Stanley knife to cut out the compartment sections, leaving the seats intact. Once the majority of the plastic is cut away, it's time to do the finer work. Once you cut into it, the plastic's actually quite easy to work with. It's another thing that's so great about these old Tri-ang coaches is the plastic is really easy to work with. It takes glue very well, and it's really easy to cut into, especially compared to the mixed materials that you get with more modern stock.
Let's go!
To remove the compartment dividers, I've just scored it a little bit with a knife, pried it off with the pliers, and I'll sand it down later. The doorways will require something a bit more heavy duty, in this case a razor saw. Anybody who's modelling and bodging stock together should get a razor saw. It's one of the best tools in your arsenal, and it's such a good thing for cutting straight lines with. A trusty old file coming to use here, sanding down the tops of the seats and any surfaces where I haven't quite cut as close as I wanted to. The sandpaper is doing a good job as are the files, but to fill the last few areas, rather than adding 100 layers of filler primer, I'm going to use my old favourite, Squadron Green Putty. I always apply it using the back of a lovely pair of tweezers. If you get a good pair of tweezers, you've got a good pair of tweezers for life. These have been with me since I started modelling, and I love them. The fact they've got a big flat edge on the end makes them an excellent applicator. In fact, I think I use them for applying filler more than I use them as actual tweezers. A small section of the roof needs to be cut out to fit around the window blank that I put in. These coaches were actually part of a collection that belonged to my friend's neighbour. When he was a kid, his neighbour got divorced, and I don't believe that the circumstances were entirely mutual, so his wife sold off all of his stock, and my friend was kind enough to give it to me because he knows that I really like trains. I thought they were perfect candidates for bashing because they're an old item, the plastic's really good to work with, and there's plenty of them. So no one's going to miss one or two being turned into funny projects. As with anything like this, when you're filling in a big hole, there's tons of sanding, filling, sanding. We're getting close to having a flat surface, but the paint guides are letting it down a bit. It's always important to test assemble all the pieces regularly just to check fitment and make sure you've assembled it correctly. Although it might look like a network rail coach at the moment, there's still a lot of bumps and bits I need to get out, so lots more sanding needed. 3 hours later. I finally bit the bullet and opted to remove the paint guides. I used a sharp knife blade for this. You have to be really careful with this and really gentle. All you're doing is shaving off a tiny piece at a time. You're not trying to cut through the whole thing all in one go. These will cut through your finger like butter, so you have to respect them and use them carefully. The old trusty file takes care of the rest. I had to be really careful to cut around the door handles and hinges, so as not to cut them off at the same time. With a nice big flat surface to work on, it's much easier to sand it smooth. Here I'm using wet and dry, I use wet. Just keep a pot of water on the desk with me and just dip it in occasionally to keep the sandpaper wet and stop it from clogging up. Right, now this looks like it's ready for a coat of white paint. I'm using white gloss paint from Halfords because it comes in a rattle can. It's quite affordable and it's really easy to spray and work with. As long as you're in a nice dry environment, I usually use a cardboard box or something that you don't mind getting paint on to hold the model. To imitate the AE86 from Initial D, I'm using some Tamiya masking tape because it's really nice and fine and it comes off in nice strips, it's easy to work with and it generally creates a nice seal. I always say this, but cheap masking tape is a false economy. Don't bother buying it, it's rubbish. It won't cut properly, it won't seal properly, you'll get bleed under the edge of it. It won't stick down properly, so it'll lift when you don't want it to, and it's a nightmare to get off the spool. The white masking tape you see here was an attempt to get a black line down the side of the coach, but it's quite difficult because the white masking tape did not want to stick to the side of the coach body. This is the coach after a coat of satin black. I also painted the rear side of the coach so that the interior would show it black. Unfortunately, the masking tape did lift in a few places and there was a little bit of bleed underneath. I think despite Tamiya tape being really good, this roll is a little bit old, so masking tape does have a shelf life, so you need to use it when it's new. I wouldn't really advise stocking up on loads of it at a time because the stuff at the back of the shelf will just go off. Just buy it when you need it, but don't buy cheap stuff. In order to try and tidy up this black line, I'm going to use a transfer from Fox Transfers, which is just part of their generic lining sets. It's just a black stripe. Quite easy to measure up on the side of the coat. It's quite hard to lay a transfer like this in one go, so I'm just going to give it a go with a bit of microsol to try and get it to conform to the shape of the doors. It's quite difficult to try and lay a transfer like this all in one go, so I'm going to break it up into manageable sections. The microsol helps me tease it into place using a paintbrush. Try and keep it under tension to stop it falling up on itself. The painted line actually helps trying to line it up because you have something to go off and trying to keep the shape consistent along its length. As any of you who've seen my lining tutorial will know, it's good to work on multiple pieces at a time so that whilst one's drying you can work on the other side. That's exactly what I'm doing here. Whilst the left hand side is drying, the right hand side is going on, and hopefully the left side will be dry by the time this side is finished with. Especially with the amount of tweaking that I do. I think this is one of the reasons that I really like double O gauge, is that it's quite forgiving in terms of detail. The line could not be completely straight, but from normal viewing distance, it's fine. You know, the old 50-50 rule, at a scale 50 yards away, at a scale 50 miles an hour, no one's going to notice. Or, since this is a tofu train, I should probably say kilometers per hour. The old wheels are pretty naff, so I'm going to remove them. I've got some spare ones in the drawer anyway. Look at the size of the flanges on these and the square axles. These ones are plastic and came out of another kit, but they'll do for now. At least it doesn't look like it's running on pizza cutters. This coach could always go through a few upgrades to practice different techniques and detailing tricks. On a well-known auction site I picked up this bag full of strangely painted people, but it's a bag full of people and it was very cheap. They are HO scale, but they do fit nicely in this coach and they're really good for decorating large amounts of rolling stock at a time, especially in places where you're not going to see it too well. I wouldn't use them for exterior detailing because the paint is very dodgy on them. Yeah, lots of happy tofu customers. This transfer sheet came from an eBay seller called My Custom Hot Wheels, so they sell transfers based on the designs from Initial D. I was able to get hold of a sheet shipped from Australia. They come in lots of different sizes, which is quite handy. I can't actually read Japanese, but I'm fairly well informed that this sign says Fujiwara Tofu Shop, private use only, which seems appropriate for this carriage. This section is the kitchen, which is where Bunta cooks up tofu ready for Takume to go and deliver. Again, I'm using microsol to help the transfer sit on the side of the coach. There's a little bit of the outer transfer paper visible, but not too much. It's actually a transparent transfer, but For some reason the film that it's printed on is a little bit thicker than usual. The transfer sheet also has lots of little information and warning panels, so I thought I'd put them to good use on the coach. And of course this coach needs a designation, and what better letter to use than D. The kitchen needs an exhaust vent on the roof, so I'm using another bit of styrene sheet cut to length. A nice simple rectangle will do. The file is used to take the rough edges off. I'm going to put it in boiling water. I'm going to use boiling water to soften it up a bit and then bend it around a suitable object to give it a slight curve and help it stick to the roof more easily. A little bit of poly cement helps to fix it on. The whole roof will be painted black in any case. I'm using a bit of Phoenix paint on a tiny paintbrush to pick out the fittings and fixtures on the doors, just to lift them off the backdrop a little bit, using a Q-tip to stir up the paint. I think painting these tiny little details really helps lift the details off of the main panels. If the hinges and handles had all stayed white, it would have looked quite bland and toy-like. I also pick up the springs a little bit in this copper colour. The ends I'm touching in black using a pen. It'll all be sealed with lacquer afterwards anyway, so hopefully it won't run. As with the Class 20 build, I'm using Southeastern Fine Cast flush glazing. I'd mistakenly called this Shoreplan flush glazing, which is slightly different. These are a little bit fiddly, and it took several attempts to get this right because it looks like they'll fit in one go, but actually you need to really put each pane of glass in individually. It's a pretty painstaking process, but I think it's worth it because the old windows being set so far back from the edge make the plastic look very thick, whereas a metal bodied coach isn't actually that thick on the outside, and the glass is often almost flush with the outside of the coach anyway. I'm using the file and scalpels to open up the window holes a little bit better and get rid of any excess paint or plastic that might still be there. With most of the panes installed apart from the small ones, you can see it really makes a big difference already. As the top windows were giving me hassle, I used a bit of gluing glaze to fill them in. This is a PVA based glue that can help fit in the flush glazing you've already got, and it can fill small holes in windows to give the impression of glass. For stuff like this it's quite simple to use, you just have to try and make sure there's no bubbles in it. It does take about 24 hours to go off properly. With the glazing done and dry, now it's time to reassemble it. There it is, the Fujiwara Tofu Shop Carriage. Now this was really an experiment in seeing what we could do with an old Tri-ang Mk.1. I really wanted to inspire people to do more things with old coaches and wagons. Don't write them off, don't throw them in the bin, anything can be reused, and it's nice to give something a new lease of life, even if it is a little bit silly. But what good is an AE86 styled BR Mk.1 without some drifting? Takumi, take it away. Thanks everyone for watching, and please do subscribe to the channel, and I hope you enjoyed this build. Please stay tuned for more pop culture style builds in the future, as well as Sudrian spotlights and all sorts of other videos, including the normal Railway Mania podcast.